Welcome to the Taos Institute's Relational Research Network video series. In this series, we explore research from a relational perspective. We hear from people working with a relational research process and learn about related values, concepts, and practices. To start, here are some of our ideas. Research from a relational perspective embodies a philosophical and co-creative stance. It is thus not a method, per se, but rather a collaborative way of being. Engaging from this perspective entails an ethical responsiveness to a focus of inquiry. Recognizing that reality is created through language and social structures means it can also be recreated. Relational research is a process that is attentive to broader relations and interactions. The purpose is to expand possibilities and co-create transformative potentials. We hope you enjoy the series and invite you to join in the conversation. Vikki Reynolds, a conversation with Tahereh. Relational research as JusticeDoing and messy practice. Vikki Reynolds is an activist, therapist, and adjunct professor in British Columbia, Canada. Vikki works to bridge the worlds of social justice activism with community work and therapy. She is a white settler on the territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. Her experience includes supervision and therapy with peers responding to the opioid catastrophe, refugees and survivors of torture, sexualized violence counselors, mental health and substance misuse counselors, housing and shelter workers, and activists working alongside gender and sexually diverse communities.
Thank you, Vikki, for accepting my invitation. I would like to welcome you and also ask you to introduce yourself to us.
Oh, thanks, Tahereh. I'm Vikki Reynolds. I'm coming from the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations of Indigenous people here in Vancouver, Canada. I'm a white settler. My people are from England, Ireland, and Newfoundland. I have a PhD from Taos, and I work primarily supporting frontline workers responding to oppression and trauma. I'm an adjunct professor, and I teach things like trauma. And I train a lot of team. I train a lot of people, and I travel and talk and stuff. A lot of what I'm doing is I supervise teams, like in the overdose prevention sites, people responding to the opiate catastrophe. I supervise teams at the Rape Crisis Center, shelter workers, and then I have teams of therapists that I supervise and other workers in solidarity teams, people working in, people responding to the prison industrial complex. Just people doing all kinds of different works. And I work a lot with people responding with refugees and survivors of torture and migrant workers, asylum seekers, that kind of stuff.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. Could you a little bit explain to us how you define relational research? What does it mean to you?
Well, I really like Dan Wulff and Sally St. George's ideas about practice as research. They were both really instrumental in my PhD at Taos, and I actually consider them dear friends, and they've had a great impact in my work. I didn't realize that what I was doing was research, and in fact, they let me know, like, everything that I've created, my work, I call my work a supervision of solidarity, and much of my work is about trying to bring social justice movements, because I identify as a social justice activist, and bring that work into this relational work. That's called therapy or social work or the helping profession. And Sally and Dan really, were the people who said, like, what you're doing is research in the moment with people about what works, So I think about relational work as the practice on the ground that's continually reformed and recursively and reflexively counter-informed by theorizing and practice, like that praxis, the relationship of theory and practice. In terms of relationship, rethinking of things as research, I've published a chapter on my quote research methodology called A Solidarity Approach, the Rhizome and Messy Practice. I wasn't that interested in my dissertation in the quote methodology, but Gail Simon, an amazing professor from the UK, published a book in which Ken Gergen is also published, and Sheila McNamee, and about, like, innovative, collaborative, relational constructivist research practices. And I was like, oh, is that me? And I talked about this, the solidarity approach, the rhizome and messy practice, and just about all of these practices from activism and accountability, and how I created that as my ethical stance for the research. So for me, the idea about relational research, it's about the practices and the ethics that matter to me, and how that intersects, with the stuff that's called theorizing or academia.
Oh, thank you. So what kind of ethics do you think you pay attention to when you do your practice, your relational research or practices?
Well, I talk about having an ethics of justice doing. That is the stance that I have for my work. And so when I'm involved in the stuff that gets called research, when I'm writing stuff, when I'm presenting a keynote, when I'm putting ideas together, to be useful to people in practice, the kind of ethics that I'm thinking about, I want to start with a decolonizing ethic, accountability to the Indigenous territory I'm on, and my ongoing complicity in that, the ways that I'm elevated by that, and how do I stay implicated, an ethical stance for staying implicated as a white settler in colonization in the ways it benefits me. And then from there, I think about justice doing as an intersectional approach. How am I addressing white supremacy? How am I addressing patriarchy, capitalism, the project of empire? All of these things, that's really important to me ethically. I also am always thinking about who is at the center. So for me, an ethical frame is about tracking vulnerability and finding in any contextual situation who is most vulnerable, who is most precarious, and then centering them. So I would say, because my work is a lot about the stuff we would call therapy or social work or the helping profession, I am about being very person-centered. By the person, I mean the person who's often called clients. How are we keeping clients absolutely at the ethical center of all our work? So that's like essential in the work that I do. And then I just have a whole bunch of micro practices that I outlined in that article around, or that book chapter around being accountable, having cultural accountabilities. So like, for example, in my PhD, the book that I wrote for my PhD, I had multiple communities who were my ethics board. So there were people who were survivors of torture. There were people who were direct action activists. There were people who were sex workers. There were people who were asylum seekers and survivors of torture. All of these folks reviewed chapters and told me where I was on, where I was off. I also had a practice of really resisting anonymity. So some people who told me stories, or some people whose work I was sharing, I couldn't say their name because it's not safe. But wherever it was safe, I did locate people. And that was a messy practice. That's not, quote, consistent, but it's ethical, because I needed to acknowledge there were times I couldn't name other people. And so I got credit for their learning. And that's messy. So I think that when I talk about my ethical stance as a messy stance, the solidarity approach is about the rhizome, that interconnectedness, and that intersectionality. And messy practice, that messy practice that's the stuff of ethics, where it's never a set of rules, and you're always moment to moment in this context thinking, who do I need to be accountable to? Where do I have lines of flight? Where do I have privilege here? Where am I subjugated here? But that I could speak about this for hours, as I'm sure everyone could. So.
Oh, thank you. So how do you think these ideas manifest themselves in your interactions with supervisees, with teams that you're working, or with, in general, in your interactions with others?
Well, I think so one of the things is all of my work I make as public as possible. So I've written a book for Dulwich Publications, the lovely narrative therapy people in Adelaide, Australia. And it's called, Justice Doing at the Intersections of Power. And you know what? I said, Cheryl White asked me to publish this research. And I said, I didn't want to. And she's like, yeah, we really need to have more voices of women in narrative therapy. I said, okay. But it was important to me that I copyleft it. I didn't copyright it. I didn't want to have it be involved in capitalism, and I didn't want to benefit from it financially. So to their credit, the Dulwich folks and Cheryl White in particular, and David Denborough, they figured out a way to actually not copyright the book so that anybody can take it and use it and photocopy it or spread it however they want. And then the other thing I did is all of the author money, all the money that I get as an author, that goes to the Wet'suwet'en land defenders, that goes to Indigenous people here, because I don't need the money from that book to help pay my rent. My rent's paid by my wage, my wages and contracts and stuff. So yeah, when I interact with other people, I try to walk my talk. I'm trying to have, Paul Ricoeur and spoke about that, in terms of, I think about it as, about hermeneutics of suspicion, that Paul Ricoeur was really suspicious. Here's your ethics and here's your practice. Are they actually in line? So when I meet with teams, and I often go into teams when, stuff is really, like I go into troubleshoot big political, problems that really require repair, racism and colonization and harm, in teams. And just the struggles of all the teams that I work with who are really working under oppression, that's the struggle, But whenever I go in with that hermeneutics of suspicion. I am hopeful that people are walking their talk, but I'm very skeptical that they're not. So I am actually bringing what Sally St. George and Dan Wulff talk about, as research as practice. I bring that into all the work that I do with people and invite them to research themselves. In fact, one of the things Ken Gergen said, if I might, this I thought was really, so Ken Gergen was officially my PhD advisor. And Sally Ann Roth was a advisor of mine as well. But Ken Gergen was meeting with me, and what I couldn't do a PhD for years because I didn't want to research exploited people. Everybody would love to have me to do a PhD because I work with sex workers. I work with survivors of torture. I work with people who've been raped. I work with people who are unhoused and drug users. It's all very like sexy, and I was like, no, I'm not handing any of my people over for research. Thinking about that decolonizing methodologies, right? From Linda Tuhoai Smith. I'm like, I'm not doing this. And then I found a way to do research, to do my PhD at Tawas, which made it possible. Instead of me going out and researching other people and finding out how ethical their practice is, I invited all these workers into my work, into things that I call solidarity groups. And I had all of my supervisees evaluate me and research me and tell me what they thought I was doing, whether they thought my practices were ethical. That's what I did. And Ken Gergen, in our first consultation, sat down and said, you have absolutely reversed research. And instead of you researching everybody else, you found a way for people to research you. And that's a brilliant contribution to research methodology. This idea that I don't need to exploit and consume and research others, that there was a way for me to, I feel that the researcher is the person who should be vulnerable. Michelle Fine talks about that. It is not the people who are researched who should be vulnerable. So I made myself extremely vulnerable, saying, come on in here. I'm going to run a supervision solidarity group with you, critique it, take it apart, tell me what you think is happening. So the research became people researching me.
Wow.
Yeah. It's a great Ken Gergen story, because I was like, he just sat down and put that, he had the language for that. This very sharp analysis. It's wonderful that he was able to offer me that. It was a great gift.
Yeah, that is very different in traditional research,
Yeah, I did it, but Ken named it. I didn't think it was that, but as an activist, of course, that's what you would do if you're walking your talk on your ethics, right? So I think about that as a really actually collaborative piece between us. In fact, what he did, Tahereh, is he drew me a picture. And he said, usually people get all this research, researchers research other people, and then you think about it, and then you make it into knowledge, right? And he said, you've done the exact opposite. You've blown it up. It's like you're starting with your knowledge and you're having other people talk about it, and then they're going away and we don't know what they're doing with it. So he actually, he actually drew a picture that was dialogical, like between us. So it was magic, that stuff.
That's so unbelievable. That's beautiful. And it's kind of, people walk away with their own conclusion rather than we theorize it for them, right?
Yeah, my thing is I'm not offering people, I don't want to be involved in dead knowledge. I'm thinking about Janice Defer from Winnipeg. I hope you're interviewing her for this.
Yes.
She's a genius in this stuff. Well, we were kind of doing our PhD together, but she really is the one that brought me onto this idea about dead knowledge, that no one wants to contribute to dead knowledge. I wasn't trying to get a PhD. I wanted to do research that mattered. If this wasn't going to be, if it couldn't be used to help do liberatory things, then I'm not interested in it, right? And so I think that was like super key as well. I am not offering people a static model of how to do supervision. I'm saying, here's the ethical stance that I have, and the practices emerge. Practices are emergent from the ethics. That's why when people go to workshops and learn tools, it doesn't work, because that kind of research, it's giving people a tool, but that tool's, if it's not connected to ethics, it doesn't land. So what I'm offering is, here's my ethical stance. Here's the practices that were emergent from me. And then, people take that and engage with their own ethical stance. And of course, there's a collective ethic, because everybody involved in my work is engaged in an ethic of justice doing. But their practices, they're not going to do what I'm going to do. I'm a white woman who's 60 now with a PhD, really working class with sleeve tattoos, I swear, that kind of stuff. Somebody else is going to do it. You are in a very different location than me, although there's real points of connection. We're alumni of the same university. And we're both women, of an age with a PhD, but everybody is going to, from their own location and their own context of their work, going to do something very different with it. So it's not a static set of tools. It's living research, isn't it? Where that research is going to be organic and do something. I think Gail Simon's work has really informed me as well about that organic. She's got her hands in the dirt, Gail Simon, about relational practices, constructivist work. Yeah.
Yes. So what impacts do you think these ideas has had on you or had on your relationships with others?
The ideas of relational research,
yes.
Well, certainly it's connected me with some amazing people like Gail Simon, and Ken Gergen and other things like that. But I think it for me, especially in my actions as an adjunct professor, it gets you out of the way of having to be the expert. We're not the knowledge keepers. I'm hoping in a way it's iconoclastic in some ways. Hopefully it's decolonizing, taking apart, in particular, Eurocentric ideas of pedagogy, of what is smart, of what is knowledge, of what is intelligence, and make space for relational knowledges. Like a lot of the work, I'm involved in a place called Peak House. I've been there for 23 years, I think. It's a program for youth of all genders responding to struggles with substances. We really believe in youth wisdom there. We're all these great therapists. We have all these smart ideas. But I think, it's ideas like this, that research is practice, that it's the youth wisdom and what youth say to each other is the stuff that matters. So I think of every group therapy that we're running there as a research project to try to find ways to make a space, a dialogical space, where, as Harlene Anderson, who's had an amazing impact on my work, would talk about, to create a relational space where youth are able to create dialogue and name their experiences with each other, bear witness to each other, share their youth wisdom, So I think that these ideas have been alive a long time before I found the language for them about it, because for me, that's very activist oriented. It comes from communities of struggle. It's not top down. It's not hierarchical. That's what I mean by the rhizome, right? From Deleuze and Guattari's idea of the rhizome. And so I just think it's had a massive impact in terms of making space for the person to be the one whose voice gets to be heard, and that it helps us take a position against expertise and fixing people and being the ones who know, and actually creating the conditions in which people can have relationships and dialogues, collaborative dialogues together that actually resist problems and are liberatory.
Yeah. So what are your hopes for the future of research as relational research is growing and becoming more visible and accessible to others?
Well, I guess my first hope is that we get new voices in the quote academy, Indigenous people in particular. You know, I'm on the territory that's soaked in the blood of genocide, and there's so few Indigenous students in the master's programs I teach in, and no Indigenous professors on these territories. So, like, my first hope is that we start to listen to the people of the land, and that we can take apart some of the, you know, Eurocentrism and white supremacy of academia and make space for the knowledge and research that's always been going on from Indigenous people. That would be fantastic, right? But I also feel there's been more spaces made for Black voices, you know, for folks of color, queer people, non-binary people, like all the voices that haven't been in the academy. You know, what are the voices that are most needing to be heard in the context of the struggles that we're in? Drug users, you know, I just think of like here we are in the midst of this opiate catastrophe. The people with all of the answers are drug users themselves, who have been organizing and caring for each other for forever, but don't have access to power. You know, these kind of research models that are relational, that are trying to bring forward the voices of subjugated people, that would be absolutely liberatory, because governments, for example, keep hiring people like me and smart people to get together with all these think tanks, you know, in mutual aid projects and solidarity groups. Drug users have solved these problems decades and decades ago. They just don't have any academic credibility and legislative power to actually transform things. So I think there's something really liberatory and radical possible here, and I get very excited about that.
Me too. Yeah. Hey, could you a little bit talk about this solidarity group? It sounds like this is the approach that you're using when you're doing relational research. I'd like to get to know it better.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's a practice and maybe it's a theory. So I'm a direct action activist, and solidarity is a really important understanding to me. And I talk about my work as a supervision of solidarity, and that has real implications on the ethical stance of the work that I'm thinking that what I want to do is be in solidarity with other workers, which requires a collective ethic for justice doing, that we're not neutral, that we're not objective, and that we're going to address power, that we're going to try to be accountable for abuses of power. And that we're the other thing about solidarity work is the idea that I am also going to be, you know, when I'm supervising supervisees or researchers or students or practitioners, I am never up here supervising, you know, and Harlene Anderson has great critiques of all these things too, right? But I actually want to be alongside people in solidarity. And I'm thinking about ideas that, you know, I want people who have the moral courage to offer me a critique. I don't want to be supported and made, you know, you know, like if I do something that's unethical or racist, I don't want someone to support me and tell me what a good person I am, what a good white person I am. I want solidarity, which requires us to have the moral courage to offer a critique and say, wow, Vikki, you say you've got this collective ethic of justice doing, but what you've just said is really racist and they just don't fit. That's what I mean by a supervision of solidarity. It's not the stuff of support. It's so much more than that, right? It's the stuff of solidarity that says, I will not abandon you. I have also known struggle. We're all not getting it right. Let's stay in this mess together. So we're going to have room for struggle alongside accountability. And I think I invite workers to build things I call solidarity teams, thinking about nobody individually can do anything. I don't do any of my work. Like, I'm always shouldered up by others. My Irish grandmother is here. You know, my best friend is in the room with me. Water's in the room with me. Like, what, you know, who are you in solidarity with? And Ken Gergen, like I said, he was he was my primary advisor for my PhD. One of the things Ken talked about with me is he said, you have a lot of textual allies, Vikki, because I bring it, I don't just reference from academia. I reference things like the Zapatistas, like Paulo Freire, like the No One Is Illegal movement, the queer, you know, ACT UP, and like all of these other social movements and stuff. You know, I reference really widely, like bell hooks and Black theorists and Black feminists and, you know, things like that. So Ken was like, wow, this solidarity, it's about having a lot of textual allies as well, right? Like not just who shoulders you up, but what theories and ideas. I think that's got a lot to do with this kind of relational research work, right? Like that we are continually reimagining our allies, our textual allies, and we are co-creating those things. Yeah, I hope this is not too messy, but when I say a supervision of solidarity, I'm talking about so much more than a group of people, a group of ideas, of ethics, and that we're being shouldered up to do justice and to do transformative work.
Mm-hmm.
Other thing is speaking truth to the lie, that we're the well and the good and we're working with the broken and that all the work goes this way. Our work is relational. Clients transform us. This is transformational work. Harleen Anderson said this to me, and one of the first times I met her in a workshop, and I fell in love with her for it. She said, Victoria, once you're in a therapeutic relationship, once you're doing relational work, you are also up for being changed in this relationship. And I just love the way she contested the neutrality, objectivity, and disengaged, disembodied professionalism of what gets called therapy, right?
Yes, yeah, the mutual contribution, the way that we may not notice it, but we are being transformed with every conversations we have, right?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I write about, and one of the ways I supervise people is I actually interview people about the transformative power of this work. People, especially because all the work I'm supervising is hard, heartbreaking, and responses to oppression. People always talk about vicarious trauma. I talk about vicarious resistance. And then also I have other ideas about how we are truly transformed by this work. So there's the conversation, the research about how workers get hurt in the work, but where's the relational research about how we're actually transformed in this work? That's been, the trauma industry doesn't want to hear about that. And that's like, those are dialogical engagements, I guess, with practice-based research, as Sally and Dan would say, they're the conversations that usually don't happen. Judith Butler would talk about, that's unspeakable acts, talking about how this work actually transforms us as practitioners, right?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much, Vikki, for your time and contribution. Any final remarks you have before we end it? Sure.
I'm thinking about John Winslade's work, and John Winslade really helped me write my chapter on the solidarity approach, a rhizome and messy practice, my relational research kind of methodology practice, and just thinking of a lot of the ideas that he's brought forward from Deleuze and Guattari, but his own readings of those things. And I managed to actually invite him into a PhD committee that I was on a couple of years ago, just because I love being in his company, and he's always a great fit. But it's great. I'm peopling the room with a whole bunch of folks. You've got me thinking of their lives and their work. So, yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you to Vikki Reynolds and Tahereh. More about Vikki at www.tausinstitute.net/Vikki-Reynolds. Please join in the conversation. What captured your attention in this video? How do you think these ideas reflect a relational orientation to research? Please leave a comment on this YouTube page or join our community at www.tausinstitute.net/relational-research-network. There you can find a lot more information and resources. We thank the Relational Research Network leadership team for the vision and dedication to making this video series come to life.